October 11, 1942. Just after 11:30 p.m. Off Cape Esperance, north of Guadalcanal. The sea is black glass, broken only by the slow, deliberate wake of American cruisers sliding through Iron-Bottom Sound. A low wind carries the smell of oil and cordite from earlier fights around the island. On the bridge of USS Helena, Captain Gilbert C. Hoover stands rigid, hands clasped behind his back, eyes useless against the darkness. There is no moon tonight. No stars. To the naked eye, the ocean is empty. Below decks, in a cramped compartment humming with electricity, a young radar operator leans toward a glowing green screen. The circular sweep pulses once, twice, then blooms with faint, unmistakable blips. Multiple contacts. Bearing northwest. Closing fast. Targets bearing 315, the operator calls out, voice steady but tight. Range, 27,000 yards. Hoover doesn't need binoculars. He doesn't need starshells or silhouettes. He trusts the machine speaking to him from below, translating invisible pulses into certainty. He gives the order calmly, almost softly. Stand by to open fire on radar. Out in the dark, miles away, Rear Admiral Aritomo Godo's Japanese column cuts southward in perfect night formation. Heavy cruisers Ayaba, Furutaka, and Kinugasa, screens tight, lookouts straining their eyes. This is their element. For decades, the Imperial Japanese Navy has trained for battles like this, night actions decided by vision, instinct, and devastating torpedo attacks. Their officers pride themselves on eyesight sharpened by ritual and repetition, on binoculars that feel like extensions of the body. And they are confident. Before the war, in staff rooms at Kure and Yokosuka, American radar had been a subject of faint amusement. A curiosity. A crutch. Japanese naval thinkers believed that true seamanship could not be replaced by machines that failed in rain, cluttered in land echoes, and dulled a commander's instincts. Optical rangefinders, well-drilled lookouts, and the human eye, these were the tools of victory. Radar, some said, would make officers lazy. Admiral Godo himself had risen in a navy that taught darkness as an ally. Tonight, he expects to surprise American ships shelling Japanese positions on Guadalcanal. The enemy, he believes, will be unprepared, lights off, crews tired, commanders blind. He does not know he has already been seen. On Helena, the radar plot sharpens with every sweep. The contacts are no longer abstractions. They have speed, formation, intent. Fire control officers translate pulses into firing solutions faster than any human eye could manage. Turrets train silently, steel rotating toward coordinates born not of sight, but of reflected radio waves. For the first time in naval history, ships are about to fire with confidence at enemies they cannot see. At 11:46 p.m., Hoover gives the final command. Open fire. The night explodes. 6-inch guns erupt in coordinated fury, muzzle flashes tearing holes in the darkness. Radar-directed salvos march forward with terrifying precision. On the Japanese flagship Ayaba, shells slam into the superstructure almost immediately. The bridge is engulfed in flame and steel fragments. Admiral Godo is thrown violently, mortally wounded before he can even grasp what is happening. Japanese lookouts, eyes trained for silhouettes and wakes, see only chaos. Sudden fire from nowhere, shells falling with impossible accuracy. Orders collide. Formation dissolves. Some ships turn the wrong way. Others hesitate, waiting for visual confirmation that never comes. In those first minutes, the old rules of night combat die. Aboard Furutaka, shells punch through hull plating. Fires spread. Damage control teams scramble in confusion, unsure where the enemy even is. There are no clear bearings, no visible targets to return fire against, only the sickening realization that the Americans are shooting as if daylight exists for them alone. On Helena, the radar screen continues its relentless sweep. Each blip flickers, shifts, weakens. The sea itself seems to be betraying the Japanese, reflecting their presence back to an enemy they once believed technologically blind. This is not luck. This is not chance. This is a weapon the Imperial Japanese Navy did not take seriously, now speaking fluently in shellfire. And as the night battle off Cape Esperance unfolds, surviving Japanese officers will carry with them a dawning, irreversible understanding. The darkness they once mastered has been stolen from them, replaced by an unseen American eye that never blinks. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, the catastrophe unfolding off Cape Esperance feels less like defeat and more like betrayal, by the night itself. As fires rage aboard Ayaba, officers stumble through smoke-choked passageways, ears ringing, faces slick with blood and sweat. Admiral Goto is carried below unconscious, his uniform shredded by shrapnel. No one on the bridge can explain how American shells found them so quickly, so accurately without warning. The sea around them is still black. The enemy is still invisible. And yet the shells keep coming. This moment, this sudden, incomprehensible violence, cuts directly against decades of Japanese naval doctrine. Before the war, the IJN had built its identity around the belief that darkness was a skill, not an obstacle. Night fighting was elevated almost to ritual. Crews trained endlessly in moonless conditions, memorizing silhouettes, rehearsing turns by instinct, judging distance by water texture and phosphorescent wakes. Officers were praised for eyesight, for intuition, for calm judgment under starlight alone. In Japanese naval journals of the 1930s, radar is mentioned rarely and often dismissively. Foreign navies, particularly the Americans, were seen as overly dependent on machinery. Japanese observers who witnessed early U.S. radar demonstrations noted interference, imprecision, and reliance on centralized control. To many IJN thinkers, it confirmed a bias already held. Machines could supplement vision but never replace it. There was also pride. Japanese optical equipment, rangefinders from firms like Nippon Kagaku, was among the finest in the world. Long baseline optics aboard cruisers and battleships could measure distance with astonishing precision if the target could be seen. In Japanese torpedo doctrine, centered on the devastating Type 93 Long Lance, assumed surprise attacks launched from darkness, guided by visual cues alone. Radar threatened that worldview. Not as a weapon but as an insult. So radar development within the IJN lagged. Early sets were experimental, short-ranged, and poorly integrated into fire control systems. More critically, many senior officers simply did not trust the data. A contact you could not see was a contact you might misinterpret. A commander who fired without visual confirmation risked wasting ammunition, or worse, revealing his position. American officers, by contrast, were learning to accept the unseen. On USS Helena and her sister ships, radar had already moved beyond detection. It was tied directly into plotting tables, gunnery directors, and command decisions. Young officers, many trained since peacetime, trusted the screen not because it felt intuitive but because it was consistent. It did not tire. It did not panic. It did not blink. Back at Cape Esperance, the Japanese column reels. Furutaka, burning and slowing, attempts to turn away, but radar-guided salvos walk across her decks with merciless rhythm. Kinugasa narrowly avoids destruction, twisting through shell splashes that land close enough to drench the bridge in seawater and steel fragments. Japanese gunners fire back blindly, starshells bursting too late, too far off to illuminate anything useful. One Japanese officer will later write that it felt as though the Americans were firing through the night itself. From the American perspective, the fight feels almost unreal in the opposite direction. On U.S. bridges, commanders stare into darkness, hearing reports not from lookouts but from radar rooms. Orders are issued calmly. Course corrections are made on instruments. Gunnery officers adjust fire based on electronic feedback rather than visual splashes. The sea may be black, but the tactical picture is startlingly clear. This clarity is new. And even the Americans do not yet fully grasp its implications. Cape Esperance is not a perfect victory. Coordination issues, misidentification, and confusion still plague the U.S. force. But the core truth is undeniable. Radar has allowed American ships to strike first, strike accurately, and strike decisively without being seen. As dawn approaches, the shattered remnants of the Japanese force limp away. Furutaka will later sink. Admiral Goto will die of his wounds. Survivors gather on damaged decks, staring out at the same sea they once trusted implicitly. Some begin to whisper an unsettling thought. What if the night no longer belongs to Japan? What if the Americans have found a way to see without eyes, to fight without revealing themselves, to turn darkness into a one-sided battlefield? The answer, though not yet fully understood, is already written in the wreckage drifting across Ironbottom Sound. And it will not be the last time. November 12, 1942. Ironbottom Sound, Guadalcanal. Rain squalls sweep across the water, smearing the horizon into nothingness. Thunderheads blot out the moon. Visibility drops to near zero, conditions that would once have favored the Imperial Japanese Navy without question. On the bridge of USS Washington, Captain Glenn B. Davis grips the rail as the ship glides forward, engines rumbling at low revolutions. He knows the enemy is close. He also knows he cannot see them. Below him, radar pulses steadily, indifferent to rain, darkness, or fear. This time, the Japanese are not ignorant of American radar. Cape Esperance has changed that. Reports have circulated through the IJN, fragmented, defensive, sometimes dismissive but impossible to ignore. Survivors spoke of shells arriving without warning, of Americans firing accurately before visual contact. Some senior officers privately acknowledged radar as a factor. But acknowledgement is not adaptation. Japanese doctrine still demands visual confirmation before engagement. Gunnery officers are still trained to trust their eyes over instruments. Radar, where available, remains secondary, useful perhaps for warning but not yet trusted to fight. As Japanese Vice Admiral Nobutake Kondo's force approaches Guadalcanal, they expect chaos, close-range brawling, and torpedo attacks at knife-fight distance. What they do not expect is USS Washington, a modern battleship holding fire in complete darkness, tracking targets patiently, invisibly. At 12:01 a.m., Washington's radar picks up a massive contact, the Japanese battleship Kirishima. The range closes. The solution tightens. In the fire control room, numbers align with chilling precision. No starshells are fired. No visual confirmation is requested. The decision is made entirely on radar data, something almost unthinkable in Japanese command culture. Commence firing, Davis orders. 16-inch guns erupt. The first salvo smashes into Kirishima with catastrophic force. Shells tear through armor, detonating inside the engine spaces. Electrical power fails. Steering jams. Fires break out along the superstructure. Japanese gunners, still searching for an enemy they cannot see, are hit again and again, each salvo arriving faster than the last. To the men aboard Kirishima, it feels as though they are being executed by a ghost. This is the full realization of the advantage first glimpsed at Cape Esperance. Radar is no longer merely an early warning tool. It is now the backbone of American night combat, guiding battleship guns with precision once reserved for clear daylight. Japanese officers fight bravely. Damage control parties work desperately. Orders are shouted through smoke and confusion. But bravery cannot compensate for blindness. The Americans dictate the engagement entirely, when to fire, when to maneuver, when to disengage. By dawn, Kirishima is a wreck. She will sink before sunrise. In the aftermath, Japanese survivors are forced to confront a brutal truth. The Americans have not only learned to fight at night, they have redefined night itself. Darkness is no longer neutral terrain. It is controlled space, owned by whoever can see without light. Post-battle reports grow more candid. Officers admit that radar was misunderstood, even ridiculed. Training manuals are revised. Development accelerates, but too late. Japanese radar sets remain inferior in range and integration. More damaging still is the cultural gap. Hesitation to trust unseen data, reluctance to fire without visual confirmation, a command philosophy rooted in human perception rather than electronic abstraction. American crews, meanwhile, grow more confident with every engagement. Radar operators gain authority. Gunnery officers learn to think in ranges and bearings rather than silhouettes. The machine becomes an extension of the commander's will. One Japanese naval officer, reflecting after the war, will write that radar stole the soul of night fighting from us before we realized it was under threat. The mockery that once surrounded American radar is gone, replaced by grim respect and a sense of irreversible loss. The balance has shifted. Not because of superior courage or numbers alone, but because one navy accepted a new way of seeing before the other was ready to believe in it. The reversal is complete. And the dark waters around Guadalcanal, littered with steel and memory, bear silent witness to the moment when technology turned tradition into tragedy. February 1943. Naval Headquarters, Tokyo. The winter air bites through the paper walls of the briefing room as senior officers of the Imperial Japanese Navy sit in rigid silence. Maps of the Solomon Islands are spread across long tables, their edges weighted down by ashtrays and steel rulers. Red grease pencil marks show losses, cruisers, destroyers, battleships, many of them circled, underlined, impossible to ignore. What was once whispered is now spoken aloud. Radar. Not as a novelty. Not as an auxiliary. But as the invisible thread connecting every American night victory since Guadalcanal. Staff officers present after action report stripped of bravado. Phrases like enemy opened fire without illumination and accurate salvos received before visual contact appear again and again. Survivors describe the same sensation, sudden, precise destruction delivered from darkness that offered no warning and no escape. There is no laughter now. Admiral Mainichi Koga, newly appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, listens carefully. He understands what many before him resisted. The war has shifted into a realm where tradition alone is not enough. The Americans are not merely fighting differently, they are perceiving differently. Efforts to catch up intensify. Japanese radar programs are accelerated. Sets like the Type 21 and Type 22 are rushed into service, mounted on cruisers and destroyers even as crews struggle to interpret their displays. Training manuals are rewritten, but habits forged over decades do not dissolve easily. Officers still hesitate to base lethal decisions on abstract blips. Gunnery coordination remains fragmented. Radar data often stops at detection, failing to reach fire control in time to matter. Meanwhile, the Americans refine their advantage relentlessly. By mid-1943, radar doctrine is standardized across the U.S. Navy. Night fighting exercises emphasize coordination between radar operators, bridge officers, and gunnery crews. Young lieutenants who once might have deferred to senior eyesight now argue confidently from electronic plots. The chain of trust is complete from antenna to shell. Japanese destroyer captains notice the change first. Night torpedo attacks grow increasingly dangerous. American ships maneuver before torpedoes are launched, turning away with uncanny foresight. Ambushes fail. The darkness no longer conceals movement, it exposes it. One veteran IJN officer later recalls, "We entered the night believing it would hide us. Instead, it revealed us." This psychological shift is as damaging as any shell. Confidence, the quiet certainty that once accompanied Japanese night operations, erodes. Crews still fight fiercely, still execute orders with discipline, but an edge is gone. Doubt creeps in with every unexplained maneuver by the enemy, every sudden barrage from unseen guns. By late 1943, the reversal is undeniable. The archetype is complete, mockery turned to reckoning. American radar, once dismissed as inferior to the human eye, has become the decisive lens through which night warfare is fought. Japanese reliance on visual mastery, once a source of pride, now feels like an anachronism, honorable, skilled, but tragically outpaced. And yet there is no clean ending. No moment of total adaptation or final acceptance. The war grinds on and Japanese sailors continue to go to sea knowing that the night, once their ally, now belongs to the enemy. Long after the guns fall silent, survivors on both sides will remember these battles not for what they saw, but for what they could not. For the realization that the future of war would not always be visible, audible, or intuitive. Sometimes it would arrive as a silent pulse, reflected off steel, returning with the certainty of death.